Hello everyone, welcome to .NET Core Central, the website for everything .NET. Today I'm going to start with testing an application or unit testing an application with SQLite database. So usually when we create database intensive application, it's very hard to do end-to-end test in a continuous integration environment. Using SQLite in-memory version, we can do the fully integrated unit testing or integration testing with SQLite in-memory database as the backend. SQLite is a full-fledged SQL database engine. In this video, I'm going to first create a project which will use SQL Server Express Edition, connect to the SQL Server Express Edition to get some data, and then I'll create a test application which will use SQLite in-memory version to unit test the business functionality that I have written in the application. For the application, I'll just use plain console application just to demonstrate how we can use SQLite. First, I'll create a .NET Core console application. Next, I will add the entity framework and entity framework core and entity framework core.SQL server NuGet packages. I'll be using entity framework as the ORM. I'm using the 2.2.6 stable version. Same thing for the entity framework core SQL Server. I'll use 2.2.6 version. Next, I'll create a data access layer. So for that, I'll go ahead and create a new class. I will name it as employee context. But before that, I'm going to show you the existing database that I have. This is the time management database. If you have been following my YouTube channel or my blog, this database I've been using for a lot of experiments. Now here I'll be using this table, the employee table. So I'll create a employee context class. The employee context class will be deriving from the entity framework DB context. I'll be overriding the onConfiguring method. And here I'll be instructing the option builder to use SQL Server. And I'll be passing the connection string. I'll generate a field connection string and I'll set it up in the constructor. I am going to expose an array of employee as a DB set from this class. Now the employee class is not yet created, so I'll go ahead and create a new class called employee. Now here I'm going to go and create all the properties which are equivalent to the database column. So I have here ID, first name, last name, address, home phone, and cell phone. I'm keeping home phone and cell phone as string because in the database I'm using snake casing. Next thing I have to do is annotate or use the attributes of table and column to pick up appropriate column names and table names. Now my employee context and the employee class is ready. Next thing I'm going to do is create a business class, something like employee provider, which will essentially return an employee. But for employee provider, what I'm going to do is first I'll create an interface which will act as the contract. For this example, it might not be needed as we would be using SQLite database itself. So essentially, we don't have to mock employee provider or even the DB context, but I'll just go ahead and create for best practices. Next thing, I'll create the employee provider class. And the constructor of the employee provider will be taking the employee context as a constructor parameter. So here I'm just using a plain link query to return an employee whose ID matches. Next thing, I'm just going to wire everything up in the main program. So it will connect to this SQL Server database, and I'll pass the employee ID 1002 and we'll see the result in console. In a production scenario or even QA scenario, I would be using a dependency injection container, but for this simple test, I would just go and hard code all the object in the main method. For the connection string, I'll just paste the connection string to my SQL Express server and time management database. And next thing, I'm going to create the employee provider, pass the employee context, and then get an employee. And we'll pass 1002 as the ID. Let's just print name and address for the time being. Hopefully I have not made any mistakes. So let's just run, and let me just yeah, so it picks up the name and the address. Yeah, from the database. So it's working fine. So our application is now ready, and next thing I'm going to do is create a test project. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new class library. And then add SQLite and entity framework to it. Next thing I'm going to install is the SQLite. So this version seems to be .NET Standard compatible, so I'm going to install this. Let me try out the entity framework core.SQLite and see what version it has dependency on. Yeah, looks like this should be good enough because it has dependency on the SQLite bundle. Then entity framework SQLite core. SQLite core has a dependency on Microsoft.data.SQLite.core. So I think we should be good. This should be the one. Let me install the stable version for this as well. Okay, now the installation is completed. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is rename this class and name it as employee provider test. And I will also add the project SQLite demo as a dependency so that I can access the class. And the last thing I have to do is get the NuGet package for NUnit. So I'll just this should be good enough. Let me set up this class for testing. And let's just write a simple test. But before we write the simple test, we will have to set up the SQLite in-memory version so that we can use it as a database instead of using the SQL Server Express. So for that, I will start with a test function. I mean, we could create a setup and do all the setup there, but for the time being, I'll just put everything in one test function and later on we can refactor. So first thing I have to do is create a new SQLite connection. And for the SQLite connection, I'm going to provide the data source as memory. Now the problem here I have is the employee context is not taking any connection object. It is just taking connection string, and based on configuration, the option builder is telling what SQL Server to use. So here what I have to do is I have to create another constructor which will take the DB context, and I have to modify the on configuring. So this is what I'll do. So all I'm doing is I'm taking the DB context options of employee context and passing it to base. This will allow me to create an instance of employee context passing a different database context instead of using the SQL Server. And here I'll have to check if the option builder is not set yet, then only set it. So all I'm saying is if the option builder is not configured yet, then use SQL Server, else don't do anything. So in this case, it'll just pick up this option. So now, okay, let me first test the console application and make sure it's still working. I'm just testing the console application, making sure it's still working as expected. I should have done run without debug, but anyway, I should be able to get a glimpse of the response. Yeah, I think it worked. It was too fast. Let me again run without debugging. It was too fast to see what exactly happened. I'm pretty sure there was no error, otherwise it would have been a lot of text. Yeah, it worked. So now let's get back to the employee provider test, and here now we are going to use the other constructor and we'll create a new context and pass it along. But first let me open the connection. This will open in-memory SQLite connection. Next, I'll be creating a DB context option builder and use SQL connection. I'll pass the connection object and then take the options out of it. Then the next thing we will do is we'll create an instance of the employee context and ensure that the database is created. I'm going to change the name of option builder because it's not an option builder. Essentially, it's using option builder to get the options of SQLite. So I'm just going to change it to options here. So this will make sure that the in-memory database is created. Next thing I have to do is I have to add some data into the database, and once I do that, I should be able to create an instance of the employee provider and test it out. Now I'm going to add a row into the database. This should create an employee with ID 1. Next thing I'm going to do is use the employee provider, get an employee with the ID 1 and just validate the first name, assert the first name. I have to add the nunit.test explorer, or there's a NuGet package which I have to add to ensure that Visual Studio understand how to run a unit test. It is the NUnit 3 test adapter. This is what is going to work. So let me install this. Now let's try to run the test again. What's happening? I'll have to figure out what's going on because the NUnit 3 test adapter should work. Not sure why it is not working. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just create a MS test project and just create the class there. So I'm just going to quickly do that. I'm going to remove this project from the solution for the time being. And we can see that the test is green. If we want, we can just debug through the steps. And here we can see all the data that we added are accessible, and this is how we can test using in-memory SQLite database. Apart from using SQLite in-memory database in testing, there are multiple other ways we can use it, especially for phone applications and things like that. But this was a very small demo to show the power of SQLite, especially during unit testing. I'm going to try out the issue with NUnit. I'm pretty sure I'm missing something very silly. I'll try to figure it out and put it in the comment below in the video once I figure out what the issue was, and maybe I'll create a small video to show how NUnit works. Maybe that's something is going to be useful. That's it going to be for today. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet. And when I create new videos, you will get a notification. Thanks so much.